All right, everybody. So we're gonna get started today. Thank you very much for joining us today. Um, the topic for today is how to analyze procurement metrics um, with with Comet Sales as a business intelligence platform. So I'm gonna be doing the presentation. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Alex, and then for those of you that do know me, nice to see you joining us for the presentation today. So a couple of things. Everybody's muted. If you want to ask a question, please do so using the GoToWebinar. There's an option where you can actually click and you can raise your hand and you can actually send a question. And we'll be monitoring those questions and we'll be addressing the questions at the end of the session. And then finally, important to note that the session will be recorded. And then once we're done with it, we'll send you guys the recording so that if anybody missed it and wants to check it out again, feel free to do so at your convenience. Well, for those of you that joined us 2 weeks ago, we're going to cover kind of like the same basics, assuming that there's new people here that haven't, that don't know what BI is. So the agenda for today is what is BI, how to use your data, the bunch of data that you have in Comet Sales, the relationship between Comet and the BI platform that we have, and then finally how to learn more about your vendors using a couple of existing tools that we already have. All right, so what is BI? BI is an umbrella term for applications used to analyze raw data. So basically, BI is a huge industry. So BI is it's an acronym for business intelligence. And as I mentioned before, there's a huge industry that focuses around business intelligence. There's hundreds or thousands of companies that focus on business intelligence. In our particular case, we're going to use business intelligence to do what's called ad hoc reporting and build dashboards from the data that you have in Comet Sales. All right, guys. So a couple of things that BI gives us. You can go from a 30,000 foot view. You can drill down all the way to a 10,000, 100 foot view. So basically, you can start looking at aggregate data. Say when you're analyzing vendors, or we're going to see in the sample dashboards that we created today, when you're looking at vendor information and you're looking over a broad period of time, say a year or 2 years, or this year compared to last year, unless you're visually looking at the data, it's very hard to look at it just because of the sheer volume of the transactions. The other thing that BI gives us is that it allows us to identify trends. So you can very quickly see, okay, the company wants to grow in this direction. Are we making our goals? And then with BI, you can easily identify those trends. And then last but not least, use facts. A lot of times, we as humans tend to be very emotional in our decisions, and then with the BI platform, you can use the facts to know exactly what's going on. And a couple examples of this. Let's say you've been working with a farm and you talk with the farm on a frequent basis. Sometimes because of that relationship, you might think that you're doing a lot of business with that farm and less with other farms. But when you look at the data doesn't actually lie. So we're going to look at some examples there as well. The advantage of BI and Comet is that we have the business intelligence platform running within Comet Sales. So even though it's another system called Jasper, we have what's called single sign-on with Comet. So if your user has access to the BI platform, once you log into Comet, you'll be able to access the BI platform, the reports, the dashboards, and the ad hoc views directly from Comet Sales without having to jump into a different system. For those companies, if it's a small company, no big deal. It's easier to roll out. If you're running a larger operation and you have multiple users, even in multiple locations, then this becomes a big deal because the rollout here becomes very efficient. In other words, I can come up with something, a report, a dashboard, and decide to share with the group. And then as soon as I publish it, everybody or the people that I want to share it with, they'll be able to see it. All right, so here's an example of a purchase dashboard. So let's say I'm just gonna explain briefly the breakdown of how this screen actually works. So notice that on the upper left-hand corner we have the date ranges. So in this case, I ran this example for purchases between 3 months ago up to the current month. Now, it's always a good practice to use what's called relative dates. Notice that I spelled the word out month, and basically month is the current month. So if I want to run it from the last 3 months till this month, I can do month minus 3 and month, and it'll show us the whole range. As soon as I change those filters, notice that it'll update what's called the different dashlets. Now we have a couple of different dashboards. The purchases by vendor. So this shows me, and notice that it's sort of descending. It'll show me what vendor has the biggest amount of purchases in dollar amounts. So by looking at it this way, notice that you'll be able to see who your top vendor is, and it'll kind of like slant down to your smaller vendors. Now in this particular scenario, this is sample data. It doesn't look very real. When you run this on your system, you're going to notice that it's going to show some surprising data, and you'll be able to see who your largest vendor is, and basically you know um, see the ranking based on the total dollar amount. And then we can also quickly see how much product we're purchasing by port of origin, for example. So we can see here clearly the big winner is Medellin, and then we have Quito, and then we have Bogota, and then we have a bunch of other things. Now, on each one of these dashboards, when we look at it on the demo, you're going to be able to either zoom in or blow up the dashboard. So in other words, when you click on this little icon, it's going to actually expand that dashboard so that you can actually look at that particular piece of data in a full screen view. Why? Because sometimes you want to zoom in, and when you have a lot of data, you want to be able to specifically pinpoint the data. So that's really helpful. And then here we have, say, I came up with a metric, credits as a percentage of total cost. So basically, this is telling me how much of our total costs are actually going as credits as a percentage of the total cost. So this is great if you want to start benchmarking your company. So let's assume that in my company, my average credits as a percentage of total cost is 0.05. So any vendor that's above that is actually above the company benchmark, and any vendor that's below that is doing great because it's way below the company benchmark. So benchmarking this information is kind of like, it's pretty useful because it allows you, again, to zoom in from a 30,000-foot view and zoom in into those vendors that are, with whom you're having multiple issues, credits and stuff. Why is that important? Because the procurement team wants to give feedback to the farm saying, hey, listen, we normally have problems with the pom-poms or the roses or whatever. And our average is for that category, we normally get 0.05 percentage of our purchases become credits. In your case, you guys are doing 0.1 or 0.15 or whatever. So you can give feedback to the farm so that the farms can, or the vendors, so that the vendors can actually look into that and figure out what's going on. And then last but not least, we have the purchases by category. Notice that same as the purchases by vendor, I sorted it based on the volume on the purchase volume. So first we have the aster, then we have the roses, then the mini carnations, and then on the right-hand side, this is an example of what's called a double-axis graph, which on the left-hand y-axis we have the total cost, and then on the right-hand axis we have the total number of full box equivalents. Assuming that everybody knows what FBE is, full box equivalents. The reason we use full box equivalents is because normally when you're buying product, you buy it in multiple presentations. You buy it in half boxes, in quarter boxes, in eighth boxes. So this kind of like levels the play field so that you know what products you're bringing in by volume. So that's a great example of how this works. Now, also notice that in this example, I'm not zooming in any one particular farm. In this particular example, we're just looking at the broad overview. So again, this is, if I'm a purchasing manager or I work in procurement, I want to be able to see how many, what's the overall status of the company. And again, having these filters here, I can very quickly change it, and I want to see the last month, the last 6 months, the last year, whatever date range I deem necessary for my analysis. So, all right. The other option, the other dashboard that we already have is what's called a vendor dashboard. Now, in this particular scenario, notice that it's a little different because we choose a vendor. In this case, I'm using a dummy vendor that we have, Capito. When I choose that vendor, then the system, I have a little, somewhat of similar data, yet a little different. So notice that here on the first dashlet, year-over-year purchase comps. So basically, I'm purchasing my last year's sales compared to my year-to-date sales. So notice that according to this chart, last year in January, February, I had no purchases, and then this year I have little purchases. Now, since we just started March, we only have a little bit here, and then we don't have anything else for the rest of the year. This is interesting in case you want to monitor how you're doing with a specific vendor. Is our relationship growing with the vendor, or is our relationship actually diminishing with the vendor? So it's it's good to know. It's good to see that with the vendor. This is also an expanded version of the credits as a percentage of sales. And then notice that in this case, I'm running like for the last 15 months. So I can see as of, I'm sorry, for the last 12 months. So as of March last year, all the way to March this year, notice that it's broken down the bottom by the year. I can see what my credits as a percentage of the total cost were per month. So, by looking at this graph, I can very quickly identify that in December last year, we had a major issue because we went from having pretty much little credits to having, well, it's still pretty insignificant, but it's 0.001 percentage of the credits. Again, this is dummy data. When you run it with your real vendors, you're gonna find some pretty interesting numbers. And then at the bottom, let's say I wanted to look at my purchases by category for a specific vendor. So, some vendors are single categories. Some vendors produce multiple different products in different categories. So you might want to, it might be useful for those particular vendors. In this case, I want to compare again my total purchases against my total purchases in dollars against my total purchases in full box equivalents. So the beauty is that notice that once I pull up the window, my dashboard, the information is right there. This is live information that's coming from Comet Sales. So the minute that the purchasing department makes changes, either processes a credit or creates a new purchase order or changes something, the data is real time. Everything's reflected real time. A couple of ideas. You can actually schedule dashboards to be sent out, like a snapshot of the dashboard. You can schedule a job and you can actually send it out. So imagine you have your top vendors. Let's say I'm in charge of buying the pom poms and I'm going to buy it from Capito. I want to be on top of Capito. So I can actually set up a job in Jasper so that this report that I'm looking at is automatically emailed to me, say every, I don't know, the third or the fifth of every month, so that on the fifth of the month I get an email with this information. I double click it, I'll open it just like I'm seeing it right now as a PDF, and then I can get a good, I can have a good sense of where I'm at with my top vendors. You don't have to do it for every single vendor, but for those vendors that are the critical vendors, um, that's a great option. So, all right, cool. So now I'm going to show you guys how this actually works in Comet Sales. So let me switch back real quick. All right, so let me pull this up real quick and purchase orders. All right, so notice that if I go to, say, my purchase orders PO summary, from here in Comet, if my user has the option to use the BI, I can simply click on Reports Dashboards. It'll open up my window. Notice that these dashboards that I'm going to show you, these are generic dashboards. You won't be able to modify them. However, you'll be able to go in, save them as, make a copy in your own personal version of Jasper in your company, and you'll be able to play with them. So let's say if I wanted to pull up the vendor analysis, I click on vendor analysis, and the notice that my, the same information pops up. Now, big difference is if I'm looking at this data here in Jasper, is I can actually take advantage of blowing the widgets. So if I click here, I can actually blow up this widget, and if I want to zoom in, let's say if I wanted to zoom in this area, then notice that I can actually zoom in and look at the values on that particular area, and then I can simply reset the zoom. So this is a pretty functional tool, especially when you have a bunch of information that's very condensed. You can actually blow it up, and then it'll be easier to read. And again, if I don't care about these categories because they're very little amounts. So I can simply say, hey, I just want to look at the categories here, and I can simply zoom in. It just makes it easier to view and easier to analyze the data. So that's pretty much how that part works. And then finally, let's take a peek at the dashboard. If I run the purchase by vendor, all right, so same concept. So it'll pull the data from Jasper, boom, from Comet, boom, there you go, real-time data. Same concept. I want to blow this up. I don't care about these little ones at the bottom. I just want to focus here on the top, and then boom, I can just do my analysis. So that's in a nutshell. That's pretty much how it works. Now we have these two dashboards that are readily available. Um, if you wanted to make a change on these dashboards, what you could do is, let's say you wanted to play with this dashboard and make a copy for yourself. If you're an admin um, in Comet, you can actually go to the BI dashboard and you can go to the repository, and I'm going to search for this specific dashboard, which is called purchase order summary. It's called purchases by vendor. So for example, so I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to go to my account. This is my company account, and then I'm going to go to my purchase order summary page, same page, and then I'm going to paste it. So notice that now I have my purchase by vendors, my dashboard, but the difference is now I can actually run it. I can actually edit the dashboard, and I'm just going to do something very simple just to showcase how this works. So let's say, for whatever reason, you don't want to have the purchase by port here. You want to have it on the other side, and you want to have this here. Let's just make that very simple change. So once I make that change and I save this dashboard, notice that if I go back to Comet and I refresh my dashboard screen, notice that now on my right-hand side, these are my custom dashboards. So these are the dashboards that I built and that nobody else can see except my company. So now when I run this dashboard, notice that it's going to open up the exact same information. The difference is we just flipped the port to the right. Again, this is a very lame example, but I just wanted to showcase the group how easy it is to actually move people, to customize a dashboard based on your needs. So what we're going to do is, as we move forward, we're building some of these dashboards, getting feedback from our users. We'll make them available to the general public, and then if you want to piggyback on what we built and basically build something different, then you'll simply copy it and do whatever I just showed you. There's another thing that I'd like to mention that we're not going to cover today, but we're going to cover in a subsequent webinar, and it's the option to actually add drill down capabilities. So, for example, we have two dashboards. We have this dashboard, which is the purchase by vendor dashboard, which is generic for all the vendors, and then we have the specific vendor analysis dashboard. So the beauty is that with the drill down capabilities, we can simply add a link from, say, in this purchase by vendor, so that if I click on the data from this particular field, as soon as I click here, it'll open up the vendor dashboard for that particular farm and allow you to look at the data there. So we're going to leave that for another session. We're going to teach you guys how to actually build those dashboards and how to actually connect the data, so that ideally you can start with a dashboard that shows you the 30,000 foot view, and then from that dashboard, by clicking, you can drill down to 20,000, 10,000, 5,000, and 1,000 foot views. So that's going to be pretty much all for today. And if you have a question, please post it, and we'll be more than happy to answer it. So let me see. All right, so the first question that we had is, are these dashboards available in the demo account? And the answer is yes, not only in the demo account, but in the production accounts as well. If you have any trouble running these dashboards or figuring out how to actually make some changes, let us know. Send us an email, and we'll be more than happy to walk you through it. And then the other question that we have is, who can create a dashboard? Who can create dashboards and reports? Admins only? And the answer is yes. Right now, users, standard users, can consume reports and dashboards, and then only admins will be able to create dashboards and modify dashboards. So those are a couple of restrictions that we have. And then and the last question is, what type of reports can I build to get more info about my vendors? The answer is, as many as you want. I mean, as we showed you last time in the previous session, if I go here to my ad hoc views, for example, and I want to look at, say, this one, purchase by product, we have, the sky's the limit pretty much. When you open up the ad hoc view and you're using the purchase order domain, notice that you can pretty much ask any question that you have, and all those questions are going to be, can be answered by pulling the information through Jasper. So another question that we have is, how do I give access to the users to see the reports and dashboards options? When you go to the user setup, and you edit the users and you go under options, there's an option here that says access to the business intelligence platform. So once you enable this, it's important that the users log out of the system and log back in, and then they'll be able to see it. Okay. Okay. I have some specific questions from specific users. So as soon as we end the webinar, I'll contact you directly and we'll go through this. Unless anybody else has any other questions, we really appreciate. Oh, hold on. So how can I create a landed cost by item in this reporting? Yep. So that's a great question. So again, if we go to the editor, notice that here on the purchase orders, we have let me see. We have all the metrics. So if it's landed cost, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one, because here we have the estimated and then we have the total cost. So let me see, total cost. Yeah. So I'm going to have to get back to you on that one, on the landed cost, because basically the landed cost is the product cost plus everything that we have here. The unit, oh, there it is, the estimated. Yeah, here's the field, the estimated unit landed cost. So basically that takes into account the total cost plus the freight and the handling and the duties, and that's going to give us the estimated landed cost. So, all right, unless anybody else had any other questions, we really appreciate you guys joining us today, and we'll be sending a copy of this recording once we process it. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you guys in 2 weeks.